It's the Great Depression. You woke up rich, then went to bed broke. No war, no warning. Just a terrifying crash that wiped out $200 billion and sent America spiraling into a decade of hunger and dust. So what the hell happened? Let's rewind to the party before the fall. Imagine waking up in 1922. The war is over, the mustaches are ridiculous, and the economy? It's vibing. Factories are no longer making tanks. They're making toasters, vacuum cleaners, and the kind of refrigerators that say, ice boxes are for peasants. New York's skyline shoots up like it's on steroids. Jazz music becomes the Wi-Fi of the 20s. Loud, everywhere, and nobody fully understands how it works. The economy is booming. People genuinely believe the good times will last forever. Even economists said something like, trust me, this decade, absolutely roaring. And the engines of growth? They're humming. The Model T rolls off assembly lines faster than ever, thanks to Henry Ford's moving belt innovation. What used to take 12 hours now takes 90 minutes. Cars flood the streets, auto plants explode with demand. Oil, steel, rubber, every linked industry gets pulled into the slipstream. The American economy isn't just growing, it's revving. As cities flourish with electricity and luxury, America falls in love with gadgets like radios. 10 million homes have radios by 1929, meaning 10 million homes now hear both Al Jolson and 30 different soap ads in glorious AM fuzz. But while cities are partying, rural America is struggling to even get on the dance floor. Farmers, once rich from wartime demand, now face plummeting prices. So they borrow to modernize. But the shiny new tractors don't save them. They just help them go broke slightly faster. Meanwhile, urban America discovers its new favorite hobby, buying stuff they can't afford. Welcome to the era of buy now, pay later. Want a radio? Finance it. A car? Finance it. Stock in a company that makes hats for dogs? Definitely finance it. Banks, thrilled by this innovation, offer installment plans to anyone with a pulse. It's the financial equivalent of saying, sure, I'll marry you. We've been on 2 dates. But the true heart of the mania lies in Wall Street. The stock market becomes Disneyland for adults. Margin loans let anyone buy $100 of stock with just $10 down. The remaining $90? Who cares? It's the future. Stocks only go up, right? Even the barber knew. Trust me, kid, utilities are hot. I made a killing in stocks. You're still a barber, though. Yes, but spiritually, I'm a tycoon. You know things are bad when your barber, your butcher, and your dog all start giving stock tips. Shoeshine boys pitch can't-miss investments to bankers. A bellboy tells a Vanderbilt to dump railroads and go all in on pencils. Between 1924 and 1929, the Dow Jones quadruples. Stock prices break free from gravity. Fundamentals? Ha 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 ha. Why look at profits when you can look at vibes? This line is going up, and so is my self-esteem. Companies get creative too. They set up holding companies that own other holding companies that own absolutely nothing. It's just layers of nothing and a whole lot of stock hype. A few people try to sound the alarm. Economist Roger Babson warns in 1929, a crash is coming. Wall Street responds by buying more stock and telling Roger to go touch grass. Jazz band starts playing over him. Dollar bills rain from the sky. Nobody hears him over the sound of cash and optimism. Meanwhile, behind the champagne and jazz, cracks are forming. Rural debt climbs, consumer debt balloons. The economy's partying on a cliff's edge, and nobody's checking if the floorboards can hold. But hey, don't worry, it's 1929. What could possibly go wrong? October 29th, 1929, America woke up rich and went to bed broke. That day would go down in history as Black Tuesday, the day the stock market didn't just fall, it performed a flawless 10-meter dive into concrete. The Dow plummeted. Ticker tapes spit out red numbers like they were possessed. Phones rang nonstop. Suits screamed. Traders fainted. One guy reportedly had a heart attack, recovered, looked at his portfolio, and had another. $14 billion of wealth vanished. Gone. Adjusted for inflation, that's over $200 billion. Not monopoly money. Real homes, savings, college funds, hopes, and dreams. Gone. Sell everything, except my Patagonia vest. It's all I have left. Outside the stock exchange, crowds gathered in stunned silence. Some held hands, some cried. Others just stared at the ground, trying to understand how an entire economy had tripped over its own shoelaces. The Roaring Twenties hadn't just ended. They had face planted into a brick wall while carrying everyone's retirement plan. And that was just the start. The crash triggered a chain reaction. First came the margin calls. During the boom, people had been buying stocks on borrowed money, put $10 down, get $100 worth of shares. Great, until the market tanks and your broker wants the other $90 immediately. Investors scrambled. Many had nothing left to repay. Paper fortunes vanished overnight. People who had been rich on Monday were bankrupt by Thursday. Bankers who had spent the summer drinking martinis now sat in their offices, staring at balance sheets like they were written in Greek. And then came the banks. Oh, the banks. These grand institutions, pillars of trust, marble floors, oak desks. Turns out, they were built on worthless paper and blind optimism. As the stock market imploded, banks couldn't get their loans back. So they did the obvious thing: collapse. And the people? They ran, not jogged, not briskly walked, ran. Bank runs broke out like wildfire. Crowds surged outside local branches, banging on locked doors, screaming for their savings. Inside, tellers tried to calm them down. Everyone, please, your money is completely safe. Okay, not completely. Entire families lost everything. Grandpa's bonds? Worthless. Aunt Margaret's savings? Gone. Little Timmy's piggy bank? Still full, but only because no one had the heart to tell him he was now the wealthiest person in the household? The disaster didn't stop at America's shores. U.S. banks, panicking, called in their overseas loans. European economies, already duct-taped together after World War I, were thrown into a blender. Germany's fragile recovery collapsed. Britain wobbled. Global trade, once the great artery of prosperity, choked and fell by half in just 3 years. Half. And yet, amidst the panic, came the denial. Newspapers printed sunny headlines. Market adjusts as investors take profits. Right below, a photo of a man pawning his wedding ring to buy bread. Politicians insisted the worst was over. Bankers in silk vests smiled nervously into microphones, delivering the financial version of, "We're totally fine, nothing's on fire." President Herbert Hoover appeared on radio broadcasts, calm as ever, assuring the American people that the economy is fundamentally sound. Meanwhile, millions sat at empty dinner tables and wondered which part of that sentence was supposed to help. And still, the system didn't stop. It just staggered forward. Broken, clueless, pretending. The crash wasn't the bottom. It was just the beginning. And what waited below? That's where things get dark. By 1931, the music was completely gone. The lights were off. The party was over. And what came next wasn't silence. It was the sound of factories grinding to a halt, of fathers whispering apologies they never thought they'd have to say, of America exhaling all at once and realizing it had nothing left to breathe in. Unemployment soared to 25%. 1 in every 4 Americans who wanted to work couldn't. Jobs vanished like smoke. Detroit, once the industrial crown jewel, watched its auto plants shutter one by one. Production collapsed by 75%. The great machines stopped turning, the lights dimmed, and the men who once assembled the American dream stood outside factory gates and waited. For what? They didn't know. Cities sagged under the weight of need. Breadlines, endless and quiet, snaked through downtowns. Mothers lined up at dawn for a bowl of thin soup. Children looked on, too young to understand why breakfast was a luxury. Teachers reported students fainting in class, not from boredom, but from hunger. They hadn't eaten in days. America wasn't starving metaphorically. It was starving, literally. Desperation crept into every room. Banks had failed. Savings were gone. Dignity was thinning. The suicide rate surged. Newspapers stopped printing obituaries. They couldn't keep up. Behind every statistic was a name. Behind every name was someone who had believed once that this country would take care of them. Marriage rates collapsed. Birth rates fell. The future had become something people avoided talking about. Who could dream of weddings and children when they couldn't guarantee dinner? And just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, the sky turned black. In the Great Plains, years of aggressive farming had stripped the land bare. When the rain stopped, the soil cracked. Then came the winds. Dust storms swept across the heartland, towering, choking, biblical. Black blizzards, they were called, and they didn't just cover the ground. They blotted out the sun. Crops were buried, livestock suffocated, homes filled with dust. Families coughed through the night and woke up coated in the earth that used to feed them. Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, millions fled. They packed everything they had into broken-down cars and drove west, chasing rumors of jobs and land that hadn't yet turned to sand. California or bust, the signs read. But for many, it was just bust. In Washington, President Hoover tried to hold the center. He encouraged volunteerism, offered modest relief programs. He even launched the Hoover Dam, an engineering marvel. But it couldn't feed the hungry in Chicago or shelter families in St. Louis. He refused large-scale federal aid, called it dangerous, called it un-American. But by then, people had stopped listening. His name became shorthand for suffering of Hoovervilles, shantytowns made of scrap and cardboard. Hoover blankets, newspapers used for warmth. Hoover flags, empty pockets, turned inside out. His legacy wasn't just concrete and engineering. It was cold, hunger, and dust. And then, something cracked. Summer 1932. Thousands of World War I veterans, desperate and forgotten, marched to Washington. They had been promised bonuses for their service decades from now, but they needed them now. They built the tent city outside the Capitol and waited peacefully. Congress said no, Hoover said no, and then the army came. I fought for this country. So did I. Tear gas was fired. Camps were burned. Families fled into the smoke. The government had turned its weapons on its own heroes. And for the first time, Americans watched in disbelief, not just at what was happening, but at who they had become. Radicalism spread, socialist rallies, communist recruitment, not because people believed in theory, but because capitalism had left them with nothing but hunger. Crime surged. Bank robbers like Dillinger and Bonnie and Clyde were seen not as villains, but as folk heroes, people who struck back at the institutions that had betrayed everyone else. America wasn't just broke, it was broken. And yet, even then, something held. Not belief, not optimism, but endurance. People didn't give up. They migrated, they lined up, they held their families, they survived. Not because they were certain things would get better, but because they had no other choice. But the question remained, in a country that once promised endless growth, what was left when the growth stopped? And who, if anyone, could lead them out of the wreckage? By March 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt stood at the podium for his inauguration. Millions leaned in. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, he said. Not gold, not banks, not even dust. Fear. It was more than a speech. It was the first deep breath the country had taken in years. Roosevelt didn't wait. Within weeks, young men in threadbare clothes were handed shovels, tents, and purpose. The Civilian Conservation Corps put them to work. You're here to plant trees and save the country? In that order? Yes. The Works Progress Administration soon followed. Millions hired to build roads, bridges, schools, post offices. They didn't just rebuild infrastructure, they rebuilt pride. People who had once stood in breadlines now stood on scaffolding, lifting steel into the sky. In the Tennessee Valley, FDR launched the TVA. Dams went up, lights flicked on. Whole towns that had lived in darkness began to glow. Families gathered around radios, not because they could finally afford one, but because for the first time, they had electricity to plug one in. Slowly, unmistakably, life stirred. GDP rose, unemployment crept downward, the dust settled, literally and figuratively. People dared to imagine a future again. But FDR didn't stop at jobs. He wanted to fix the machine, not just oil it. So he built rules. The SEC, to keep Wall Street from doing Wall Street things. The FDIC, to protect your money from disappearing again. Banks reopened, but this time, people weren't running in to withdraw everything in a panic. They were depositing. Quietly. Hopefully. Then came Social Security. It didn't make anyone rich. It didn't need to. It said, you matter. We'll remember you. You won't have to work until you collapse. It wasn't flashy, but it was monumental. Even the arts got a job. The Federal Arts Project paid painters, photographers, and writers to capture the soul of a recovering nation. One photo, Migrant Mother by Dorothea Lange, became the face of it all. Her eyes didn't say, we're saved. They said, we're surviving. Hollywood chimed in too. People packed into theaters to watch The Wizard of Oz, where a gray world turned to color. In the middle of a depression, Americans still dreamed, maybe more than ever. Cities buzzed again, restaurants reopened, radios played swing music, and if you squinted, just a little, the skyline looked like it was rising again. In the distance, factories started humming, but this time, not just with consumer goods. Helmets, boots, ammunition. The world was shifting again. And America? America was starting to stir, not just for recovery, but for something bigger. The Great Depression didn't end with a celebration. It ended with work, with blistered hands and tired backs, with legislation, hope, and a little jazz, with a nation that had collapsed, choosing piece by piece to rise again. But as America stood back up, it didn't realize that something else was already on the horizon, something darker, louder, global, and this time, the whole world would feel it.